Hey everybody from the Petersen Automotive Museum. Welcome to Justice Brothers. I'm Ed Justice Jr. and I'm going to give you a tour of our collection. One of my dad's best friends was a guy by the name of Louis Center, who was one of the founders of Anson Automotive. Anson was Andrews and Center, S-E-N-T-E-R. Jack Andrews and Louis Center. And Louis was the first guy to put mag wheels, production mag wheels on the street, as I understand. This was his personal hot rod. It's got a Offie 4-cylinder Indy motor in it. Just crazy. It's street legal. It's licensed for the street. Probably the scariest ride I ever took in any car was when Louis took me in this car at 80 years of age. I won't even go into the details anyway, it was crazy. And Louis was a very, very dear friend, but boy, a lot of horsepower, 80-year-old guy. You know, what could go wrong, right? But anyway, of course, we have a powered bar stool, most dangerous thing we own. I've been on it once, that was enough. And you can't really bail off that thing if things start to go wrong. We have a pretty significant amount of open wheel dirt race cars from the American form of racing, sprint car racing, roadsters, that type of stuff. And again, that's part of our theme, the history of the Justice Brothers and American racing. And then of course, we've got a nice variety of Ford, 30s vintage Fords, 39, 36 Ford Phaeton, 36 Ford sedan convertible, a 32 Roadster that's dead stock, and a 34 Phaeton. And my dad came to California in a car just like this car right here, the 36 sedan convertible. He left his little town in south of Kansas City, Paola, Kansas, drove out Route 66 with 3 passengers who paid him $25 each and drove by. We're on Route 66 here. He drove by here as a young guy. He had gone to aircraft mechanics school and had a job waiting for him at Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica, California. This is just not the car, but same color, same type of car. My dad had more customization on his car, but figuratively, this is really what brought him west out Route 66. We have a number of engines. This biggest motor over here was the inboard motor in our good friend Parnelli Jones' personal boat. 1,500 for real horsepower. I have the dyno sheet on it. It was built in Parnelli's race shop, twin turbo, big block, Rodix heads, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's got all the stuff. Then we have the Chevrolet V6, the 90-degree V6 that A.J. Foyt ran in Indy cars. We've got one of the Cosworth motors here, a Ford flathead, a couple floor jacks. You know, a lot of times people, particularly under a certain age, don't realize how easy we have it today compared to the way it used to be. You know, these floor jacks, you can buy them for hardly anything. Boom, boom, 2 or 3 pumps, and you've got the car up. These weigh more than your car, and it takes forever to take it up and down. Letting people try these out when I have young kids in here, it just really makes it real about how much tougher it was. Again, with some of the open wheel dirt cars that we have, this is Jimmy Oskey's, sprint car. Jimmy Oskey was a multi-time West Coast sprint car champion, one of the best ever in the West Coast. He and Dean Thompson and others were really great competition at Ascot on the weekends. That car is straight off the track, not restored. It's very honest car the way it is. We have a Blair's high performance sprint car, again, a little bit different era. And then we have the Rayleigh Goodwin Midwest IMCA championship car. Again, if you compare that car to the Jimmy Oskey car, this is a much smaller car, both called sprint cars, different sanctioning bodies, but again, lots of stuff on that. And on the wall, this is part of the bodywork that came off the car that Kurt LeDuc won Pikes Peak with in the two-wheel drive division years ago when we were with him. You know, we have all sorts of stuff, like I mentioned, from our racing involvement. This is one that's sort of special to me. This is the leathers from Dennis Sigalos, who we sponsored in Speedway motorcycle racing. Dennis was an American rider, went over in Europe, along with a bunch of other American riders, carried the flag over there, and of course carried the Justice Brothers. And what's really cool about these leathers is they not only represent Dennis, but they represent another generation of the family that we worked with, and that's Connor DeFilippe. Connor, we worked with when he was a Porsche Junior driver, started with him in go-karts, and now he just recently signed to be the BMW prototype driver in the IMSA series. That's all sort of wrapped up in this piece of memorabilia here, is our long history with this great family and these great racers. So his boots with the steel shoe on it, his leathers, this suit was on him when he won races, was on him when he hit the dirt, was on him when he got in crashes with other riders. There's just so much contained in something like this, and very special to me. Again, we've got more dirt American racing midgets. This car here was used in a film with Clark Gable called To Please a Lady. Very special. That and the other movie that I mentioned earlier, The Big Wheel, are still on cable. You find them all the time. We have an Isetta, very unique little car. A lot of people go, well, what causes you to buy this car or that car? I don't know. Maybe I have a short attention span or whatever. I just see something and I go, these are pretty neat. And I can't remember many cars having a door on the front of the car and no roll up or roll down windows and having this sort of funky convertible action. And so, you see it, you go, hey, I sort of like it. And the 1950 Crosley wagon. I mean, this is a company that made radios and refrigerators and cars. Now there's an interesting combination for you. If I had had this car when I was younger, this would have been my surf wagon, 1950 Crosley wagon. I mean, how cool would that have been? I would have maybe not bought my 1959 Volkswagen bus, which we called them a bus, but actually the technical name that Volkswagen sold them under was a station wagon, as I remember. This midget here is very special. This was a car that my dad and uncle built for Bill Vukovich, who's a two-time Indy 500 winner. We acquired this from the Vukovich family, had helped them restore this years ago, and then we finally were able to buy the car back. And so my dad and my uncle, their hands were on this car when it was originally built. It's a Curtis. It was built from a Curtis kit. It's got a Drake motor, a water-cooled Drake motor, which is a Harley V-twin with Dale Drake water-cooled engineered heads. And then of course, this is an Alto 460. Alto was an outboard motor, horizontally opposed 4-cylinder. And this was a popular pre-war motor for midget auto racing, which was sort of a junk formula pre-war. It was Earl Gilmore at the Gilmore Stadium down in Los Angeles that actually underwrote the cost to make the Offie midget motor. He wanted a more dependable motor. He didn't want these cars breaking down at the show. So he wrote the check to Offenhauser to have Leo Goosen, the famous engine designer, pin the design for the midget motor. And of course, it was a stout motor, racing got better, and that's why after the war, with the tube frame chassis that my uncle was there with Frank Kurst to help develop, and the Offie engine, midget auto racing reached its peak of that era. I mentioned about midget auto racing being the biggest form of racing after World War II. This event that we have the picture at the Rose Bowl, California, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, is evidence of that. This was not a support race with a football game. This was a freestanding event. They ran at the Rose Bowl, they ran at the Los Angeles Coliseum where the Olympics have been held twice, Culver City, they ran at all the big stadiums. Prior to midget auto racing, all the races were at big tracks outside of the cities. Midgets could literally run at the high school track on the quarter mile, and they did. And so that brought racing into the cities. And so you had these different places with the posters. These are some posters that have blown up. And actually in 1948, August issue, midgets were on the cover of Road and Track magazine. Now, if you know much about Road and Track, even from my youth, you would never think that there'd be midget auto racing on the cover of Road and Track. It was all about road racing and that type of stuff, primarily European sports cars and all that. August 1948, they put midget auto racing on the cover, running on a board track. These are 2x4s on end. And this was over at the Rose Bowl. They ran a board track there for a little bit. And that just shows you how big it was. There's a lot of history in all these different midgets here. This one I'll point out real quick as we walk by was a 7-time West Coast champion. The Francisco Racing Fuels, George Noonan owned the car, Lowell Sachs drove it. This is a 1946 Curtis copy. It's a copy of a Curtis, total copy. Looks like a Curtis, but it was built separately. And this car, this 1946 design, still was winning championships in 1971. Pretty amazing. You know, that's what you get when you buy a lot of the older race cars. You buy a lot more history. Today, you know, a car on a team, like, you know, if you get somebody's stock car a few years ago, they maybe had 5 different stock cars that the driver used to get the championship. Now today it's a little bit different with this new car that they have and some of the other cars. But back in the day, they would repair the car and make it last. Today, they basically throw it away, get a new one. And so the older race cars, you get more history typically. And so that's a really unique car in that regard. This another one, this was a Dreyer midget. This was restored by Junior Dreyer, who was the son of Pop Dreyer. And he was the first Honda dealer in the US, as I remember. They're located in Indianapolis, Indiana, great family. We work with, in fact, the offspring of the family at Indianapolis. We sponsored the Dreyer Reinball racing team many times over the years. Have great respect for this family's history, very much in a similar but different way to our family's history at Indianapolis. And then of course we have a Edmonds midget, Don Edmonds, very good friend. This is a 73. You know, if you're gonna have midget history and all that, you gotta have an Edmonds. Edmonds was the modern day Frank Curtis. Here's a Bob Bogan race car. It's got a Ford Pinto motor in it. You know, that 2000 cc 4-cylinder Ford Pinto was made into a lot of different forms of racing. It was a really, really stout motor. I think it was Fontana that made a copy of it with an aluminum head. And it just went into everything. I mean, they ran it in road racing, et cetera, et cetera. Was just a really good design that Ford had come up with. And of course, the racing field, they see a good idea and then they just build on that, obviously. Here's another Alto outboard motor. In the corner is a tribute car to the Steve Stapp, A.J. Foyt, George Snyder sprint car. We have a more modern day CRA sprint car. And then of course here in the corner is a roadster dragster, rear engine dragster with front wheel fairings. This was in Mickey Thompson's garage when he was unfortunately murdered. And Mickey was going to take the car to Bonneville, set some records or whatever. The car was actually built by Ernie Alvarado, who was a very good friend of mine. I was actually a pallbearer at Ernie's funeral. He owned a camera store in Glendale and he was very, very kind to me. Would actually sell me cameras at cost. This is really a special car also. There's more to it. It's a Ford Roadster body in the rear with a streamlined front. Tony Nancy upholstery. You know, I could go on, but it's a special car. And because it was Ernie's car, again, you know, Ernie was a very, very close friend of my family and mine. And so, you know, it's got a connection. cars represent a lot more than just metal and, you know, paint. And there's a lot more there. And, you know, as my friend Donald Osborne says, nobody ever shows you a picture of their refrigerator, but they will show you a picture of their car. You know, again, with this eclectic feel that we have, and, you know, sort of like American racing, Justice Brothers, our history, et cetera, and what sort of captures our fancy, this is one. This is a rebuilt tribute to the first belly tank, the very first belly tank. Now, you've seen pictures of belly tanks, I'm sure, if you know anything about hot rodding, after World War II. This was the first one that was built, and it was built by Bill Burke. Belly tanks, when we would go on missions in Europe, the bombers had a lot of fuel. They were big airplanes, they had a lot of range. The fighters didn't have near the range, and they had to also be very fast and maneuverable. So they would put a tank under the belly of the airplane. So Bill Burke, being a World War II vet, had seen these, and there, of course, when we ended World War II, there was a tremendous amount of real surplus. Bill thought, very wise on his part, this is a perfectly aerodynamically designed shape that would make a great body for a race car. So he took a Model T frame, modified it, put it inside, mounted the motor in front, put the driver here. It's the only belly tank that was ever built with the motor in front. All the rest of them, they used a bigger tank, bigger than this, and they put the driver up front and the engine behind. But this car actually, the original car actually went 132 miles an hour, just a tick short of 132 miles an hour, over the hill in El Mirage on the dry lake over there. And so this car, it represents the beginning of that dry lakes belly tank. You know, like you might be familiar with the SoCal belly tank that Bruce Meyer owns, or some of the other belly tanks. So there's a picture of Wally Parks, the founder of the National Hot Rod Association, also Hot Rod Magazine's first editor, in a belly tank. It was a really, really great form of dry lakes racing. The car in the back here, this is another one. They just ran it, well, they run it every year. I think the 81st year, something like that, of the Turkey Night Grand Prix. It's the longest running midget auto race in American history. And it started in 1934 at Gilmore Stadium, which is close to the Petersen. If you go to the Petersen, you can go up to the Gilmore Island, they call it. And CBS Television City is where the stadium used to be. And 1934, again, first year. This was the second year winner, 1935. It's the oldest surviving winner from the race of the Turkey Night Grand Prix. I love this car because it's just so raw. I mean, this car is, you can really understand the danger in the racing in this era. And I mean, I always jokingly say you could get hurt by looking at this car. It's so raw. But it was nicknamed as the Flying Bathtub. And if you look at this, you can sort of see how it gets that nickname. Of course, this car is a 1933 sprint car, very special, fun car. And we have the track roadster, picture of my dad and my uncle over on the wall over there that we walked by. That was the first midget they ever built. And this is the first time they went to Indianapolis, 1946. My uncle Zeke was on the crew of the winning car with George Robson. And a 1932 original Ford steel-bodied hot rod. This car, again, represents a big part of our history. My dad and uncles were the first multi-car sponsor in NASCAR. They were literally the first sponsors in NASCAR. And this is a tribute to the car. The real car doesn't exist. It was junked years ago. It's a 1939 Ford Standard Coupe, and it was driven by Red Byron, and he won the first NASCAR race at Daytona Beach, which was the first NASCAR sanctioned race, and he also won the first championship in NASCAR in a car just like this. Again, this is a tribute, and my dad and uncle sponsored that car along with a lot of the other cars, and they were there on the beach that day. Actually started sponsoring stock cars before NASCAR. And we have a number of other cars, you know, a 57 Thunderbird, a 55 Corvette with a V8 with a stick on the floor, which is a rare combination, an 88 911 Turbo, and that 1964 356, which I want to tell you more about that. Let's go down there. You know, I've always loved the 356 Porsche, or Porsche for you purists out there. You know, it's ground zero for Porsche. And this car though, I'd always wanted to get one just because they're so innocent. They're not known for a lot of horsepower, trust me. It's all about the driving, the way it steers and all that. You don't need, you know, to have a spirited, fun drive, you don't need massive amounts of horsepower like is the philosophy today. But this car in particular is very special because this was bought new by a very close friend of mine. We were motorsports photographer associates for over 50 years. And there's actually a well-known picture of me with two cameras, and over my shoulder is the gentleman, Dale Von Treba, that actually owned this car. When he got it in 1964, he traded in his 1958 356. Now look, the older ones are really desirable to own today, but back then, the newer the better. This had disc brakes. This was the first year of disc brakes for Porsche, and it had a lot of other upgrades. And so he traded in his 58, took delivery of this back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and proceeded to drive it the next 17 years to every motorsport event that he photographed. Okay, he put 366,490 miles on it. And he was a full-time motorsports photographer. I was part-time, he was full-time. He drove this to the Indy 500 14 times. He drove it to Watkins Glen for the road races there 17 times. He drove it to Mosport. He drove it to Three Rivers in Canada. You name it. This car has been at every track, and most of them 17 times. How do I know he put 366,490 miles? Well, you might say the odometer, but you know, the odometer turns every time it goes to 100,000, right, I think? And he logged it. He actually kept a logbook. He was a bachelor. Now, I always jokingly say there was a reason for this, and you're gonna see why. He logged every single fuel stop from zero. When he got the car, he drove it from Milwaukee to Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin to Road America for a race, filled it up. The next fuel stop, all the way for 17 years. Every tire change, every repair is logged in a logbook. So you name a place in that 64, I think it is, to 81 period of time, and I can tell you within a couple hundred miles at the most where this car was in North America. Is unbelievable. So when I got the chance to get this car, what really appealed to me was everybody always wants that low mileage car, and our 57 Thunderbird only has 3,000 original miles. Okay, I own one of those. But I love a car that's got 366,490 miles. Why? Because this car is like the guy that's sitting on the bench and you go, hey, what'd you do in your life? And he goes through, I was in the Nile River, the Amazon, I climbed Kilimanjaro, I summited Everest, I jumped out of 5 airplanes. That's a life well lived versus the guy that said, the 3,000-mile car, I sat on my couch the entire time. I'm a low mileage guy. So this car, I'm a proponent. I love cars that have been well used, well abused. And yeah, you can restore them. Now today, maybe I would have left it. I restored this 20 years ago. Maybe today I would have left it in its original condition, but that wasn't a consideration 20 years ago. It's changed and changed for the better, maybe in a lot of respects, for sure. But every time I get in this car, I think about my friend. I own all of his camera gear. I own every receipt that ever was with this car. I got the original invoice. I've got the little slip of paper that the salesman wrote the special deal on trade or whatever. Crazy. This guy did not throw anything away. I got it all. And boy, I'll tell you, that's really, really something special. This is a diamond in the rough to me. I got a quarter midget. This is it, restored. This was my jacket, my race jacket. This was my helmet, plastic. Hey, better than nothing. And I ran it for a short while, and then my mom ended my racing career. And you know, a lot of people ask me, I get this question all the time, why didn't you become a race driver and all that? My dad and my uncles were just way too close to racing. They were losing 10 friends a year back in that era. I mean, between fire, blunt force trauma, oh God, I mean, you know, you name a way you can die in a race car, and people were unfortunately getting killed that way. It was really, really, really dangerous. So the last thing that my dad or my mom wanted their son to do was to become a race car driver. So I've driven go-karts and different things, and you know, I've driven a lot of cars for sure. But as far as being a professional race car driver, you know, I followed my parents' lead. There was people like my good friend Dan Gurney. It didn't matter what his parents said to him. He was going to be a race car driver, and thankfully he did become one, because we all got to enjoy his incredible talent. But for Ed Justice Jr., it just wasn't in the cards. And my dad got me into the photography, and you know, I really loved the photography. I loved the visual side. I loved constructing the image. And that really turned out to be really my thing, is capturing the history rather than actually being the guy in the car being captured by somebody else. And so I look back, I have no regrets. I drive great cars all the time, and I drive great cars at high speed on racetracks on a number of occasions. But the photography has been my lifelong love, and being a professional photographer has just really been very rewarding for me. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Petersen YouTube channel. It's been my pleasure to give you a quick tour and show you some of the highlights of the Justice Private Automotive collection. I think you see that the cars and racing and all that means so much to me, as it might with you if you're watching this, and particularly if you've made it to this point. Really appreciate your time, and we're located here in Duarte, California. Love to see you anytime. Thank you very much.